Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben, this is Books with Genghis Khan, and today I have for you the first of my two year-end top lists, and we're starting with my most disappointing books of the year. A video I tend to enjoy making because it could be cathartic to vent a little bit and get some frustrations out, since I tend to feel very salty about the reads that don't work, because the vast majority of my reads are compelling, I'm invested, I'm immersed, and as you can see from the ratings of all the books I've read this year, the vast majority have been 4 or 5 star reads where my engagement is pretty much constant throughout these books. And with so many new authors to try and hundreds of books on my TBR just waiting their turn patiently here on my shelves, I feel that acute opportunity cost whenever I spend time in something that did not pay off for me and give me any kind of fulfilling experience or impactful, memorable experience that I thought was worth that time investment. But I really don't think any of these are particularly poorly executed books, except for the one at the very top of the list. I think they all do a pretty good job of what they're trying to accomplish. They just weren't the books that were to my taste and that I was looking for. And this is very subjective, and I think it's helpful for my audience to be able to calibrate kind of their taste in relation to mine. And if you know that you align really well, maybe you might not want to then check out these books or series which didn't work for me, and I could save you some of that time or frustration. So I do enjoy getting this kind of list out there at the end of every year. Oh man, the beginning of this list is not going to be kind to Martha Wells. So at number 10 is Witch King, her new fantasy release from this year. So I had been a Wells fan for a few years based on the first 5 Murderbot books that I had enjoyed, and I had not tried any of her fantasy, and seeing a new release in fantasy, I was excited to get a different taste of this author I had liked, and I just could not have felt more disconnected from this story. I've seen other people have similar experiences, and so I know it's not just me, but I could not get into this story. I just could not figure out what was going on, who were these characters, what was the situation, the world, the setting. I couldn't get a handle on any of it. It felt so convoluted, but not written in a way that I felt it was supposed to be dense. It was such an odd experience, but I thankfully just got an e-arc and an audio arc through NetGalley. I was trying it both ways, through audio and in print, and it just wasn't working for me in either format. Since I got it for free, it was easy for me to kind of DNF it and put it down after just spending a little bit of time with it. But for people that I've seen have read the whole thing, they said that kind of convoluted style where it's hard to know kind of what type of story it's trying to be, that is an issue that kind of a lot of people had with the whole book. Yeah, I don't understand what Wells was trying to do with this one. Very odd book. And at number 9 is another Martha Wells book. Oh dear, that's System Collapse, the new release from the Murderbot series this year. And I had a much easier time reading this one than with Witch King, but it disappointed me more because it was an entry in a series that I had been a big fan of, but now just found myself losing interest in. I think the internal monologue with Murderbot and the way Wells writes it with a lot of parentheticals and asides is still charming, but the plot of this one didn't really have my interest. I have really big issues in getting invested in all the human side characters. I feel like they're very kind of similar and indistinguishable from each other, and so it was hard for me to care about a lot of what was going on because of that. I had also trouble just visualizing the surroundings, and so it just wasn't holding my interest that much, and I fear that this was a series that's just kind of falling off for me, going in a direction I'm not too interested in, and that's kind of sad because I was a big fan of those first 4 novellas. But I, now looking back, kind of just wish that was it for Murderbot. It was a fun little adventure, but now just stringing it along in kind of never-ending episodic fashion, not really doing it for me. So yeah, that was a little disappointing. At number 8 is Monster Hunter International by Larry Correas. This is a different kind of disappointing, since this was a new author for me and a new series, and one that I didn't have that high expectations for, but I wanted it to be a kind of fast-paced, fun, urban fantasy kind of palate cleanser. And this being Correa's debut, I also want to cut it some slack, but it was pretty chunky and just took a long time for me to get through, and I found the action kind of uninteresting, really heavily gun-based action set in the United States. Didn't really get into any of the characters. The dialogue felt ultra cheesy, and the overarching plot felt like very similar to the Avengers kind of thing, with the type of villains and portals to another world where demons are gonna maybe come in and destroy Earth. It felt very Marvel-esque, and I'm not a big fan of that. So very little was really working for me here. But I want to try Korea out with maybe some of his other fantasy series. And since this was debut, I think it's worth maybe continuing on trying book 2. But it didn't deliver with what I was hoping it would. Alright, the next 3 books are very similar in a lot of ways because of a very similar kind of first-person POV protagonist. And I should not have reached for these 3 books, or just maybe ever, or at this particular time, because I had read a book a little bit earlier in the year, Empire's Ruin by Brian Staveley, where one of the main POVs, and probably the one with the most page count, was a similar character to this. And I think Staveley executed this character who is kind of a young adult, 20-something female, with depression, really focusing on their inner emotional life and working through their identity and relationships with other people. And I thought Staveley executed that character pretty well. And then I picked up all of these 3 books not too long after that with trying to do a similar kind of thing, and maybe I was just tired of that type of POV at that point, but I don't think any of them executed it as well as Staveley, and I just was not in the mood for these reads and should not have reached for them. So I do think your mileage may vary with these 3 especially. And number 7 is Rubicon by J.S. Dewis. So this was a new sci-fi release from earlier in the year. The author of The Last Watch military sci-fi series. This is my first exposure to Dewis, and I got an audio arc and thought the narrator Eunice Wong did a good job. And this story was okay for me, but it just didn't compel me to the point where I was getting emotionally invested. I found it hard to visualize the settings. There wasn't too much description, and the action was a little clunky, and the focus was on the main character's internal emotional life, just constantly narrating every single emotion that they're having, and I was not in the mood for that. There was a highlight of this read, which is the title Rubicon refers to the AI assistant that gets injected into the main character's kind of brain at the beginning of this book, and their interactions that they have together are great. I love this kind of story trope, but Dewis just did something that was just narratively catastrophic for me, which was she gave Adrian's commander the ability to turn Rubicon off. And for most of this book, Rubicon is in off mode, and the book was just so flat when that was the case. The other side characters and figuring out like Adrian's friendships and romance stuff felt very kind of generic and predictable. But the best parts were with Rubicon, who was turned off. Like, why couldn't we just have had a Murderbot situation where he's hacked into the system and they can override that sort of thing? And I could have had Rubicon there almost the entire time. That was just a very strange narrative choice for me. And this book was okay, but it is just, I could tell Dewis's narrative and storytelling priorities just don't line up with mine, and I don't think I'll be trying out any more of her books. Same goes for the one at number 6, and that is The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. So I thought I knew what I was getting into with this one based on the cover. I had the sense from the cover that this was going to be kind of romance-focused sci-fi, but the romance that it hints at on the cover is not well developed at all. There's actually another relationship and romantic possibility that's developed much more. The book didn't deliver on that side, and I could go for romance, and I sometimes really like that in my books, but it didn't deliver on that side of things. The sci-fi kind of interdimensional travel between different similar versions of Earth, that world building could have been really interesting, but it was just so flimsy and not built out at all. It was not the focus of this, and the world felt so small, limited to just kind of one big futuristic city that we don't really get a feel for. It just basically has one location, one corporate office building, and then this kind of poor town next to it. And the world feels so small, limited to these 2 locations, and even certain spots in these locations. And then it's a lot about kind of this main character working through their traumatic past, their current kind of emotional life and relationships. And it was fine, but not the kind of thing that I was really wanting in that moment. Action, not too compelling. The overarching plot, I really did not care where it went or what happened. And when you're apathetic, that's never a good sign. So I do think this book could hit for someone that was looking for exactly this kind of thing. More of a young adult leaning sci-fi story that's really focusing on the inner emotional life of the main POV protagonist. Same goes for Rubicon and the next book as well. So yeah, not terrible at what it's trying to execute, but not the book I was really wanting from this. At number 5 is probably easily the best executed book on this list. It just was not for me. After I just read all of these similar stories, I should not have reached for this one as my first ever Fonda Lee book, and that was her novella, new release, Untethered Sky. So actually after this, I then picked up the Greenbone Saga and fell in love with that. And Lee is now a favorite author. So it was just this first book that I should not have picked up at this time, because this kind of novella around this young adult, 20-something female POV who is trying to figure out themselves in this moment and establish themselves professionally and figure out what's going on with their friendships and romantic possibilities. Man, that's very similar to what I was describing with the other books. So I was just tired out with this type of character, and that was really the focus of this novella, and building relationships with this giant bird, Hunter, the Rock, and a lot of the action was hunting focused, and that didn't really interest me too much. I didn't get too involved in the world, but then again, for a novella, I think it did an appropriate amount of world building, and the scope of the story was small, and I think suitable for the size of the book. I just never really got into it, cared where it went, but I think there are a lot of poignant aspects to it, so just not the right book at the right time for me. And I know a lot of other people have liked this one a lot, but a very particular type of story. And I was doing this one also on an e-arc on my phone, and a lot while I was actually waiting in the very busy Social Security office. And so like the actual circumstances under which we read a book probably have a large effect on our enjoyment of it, and my ability to get immersed in this was really hurt by that. But anyway, I should have just waited and tried out Lee with the Greenbone Saga first and come to this when I maybe was ready for this kind of story. Number 4 is a similar situation with a novella with an author that had gotten a lot of buzz that I was excited to try out, and that is Prelude to Ashes by Tiago Abdullah. So I have seen so much buzz in the last couple years with his Ashes of Averin series, with the amazing covers on the books, and Touch of Light is one that I was excited to dive into. But he offered this free novella to people as a kind of a prequel novella that you could read first, and I thought, okay, let me dip my toes into the world with this novella. And it's a very action-packed, fast-paced novella. It doesn't do a lot of setup, exposition, or world building, and I realized that that's probably not my best kind of first exposure to a new world and series, because I just am not caring about the situation. If I don't understand the conflict and the factions at play, if I don't really understand how the world works, the fighting, the magic, then it's all just kind of meaningless action. And I didn't think these battle scenes were particularly easy to visualize, and people were just like kind of moving around the map, and I had no sense of the geography, and it was just overall not a very compelling experience, and kind of one that turned me off, I think, from the story, which is unfortunate, because then I tried getting into A Touch of Light, and I think I was just out of it at that point, and I needed to wait, and I think I will give Touch of Light a try sometime in the future when I've had more distance from this novella, and I should have just saved this novella for later, because I would rather start a series, I think, with more traditional kind of setup and exposition. And I don't want to make the same mistake with another series I'm excited about, which is the Bound and the Broken series, so I will start that one with just the first novel instead of the kind of first novella. We're getting into the top 3, and these were the major disappointments of the year. I had actually a lot more of those last year that I was very salty about. So this year is limited to just these top 3 that were just stand out in my memory as being just hugely disappointing for different reasons. So this first one at number 3 is book 2 in the Broken North trilogy. It's The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. this was just utterly disappointing because I was really energized after the 5th season in book 1. I was into the series. I wanted the trajectory just to keep on going up to get me more engaged and invested, as often happens in series with me. And this just ground my momentum with the series to a halt completely. And I look back at this trilogy and think, wow, it would have been an amazing, tight duology. But for some reason, just this particular plot in book 2, it didn't, I don't know why we spent so much time with it, because it didn't pay off as being so important to the overarching series plot in the end. And it just kind of brought our characters to a standstill situation, that in this situation, just the side characters, the dialogue, the conflict, just not very compelling. And I didn't, and still don't see the real point for why this book needed to exist. And the definition of middle book syndrome, where I just don't think this author knew what to do with this middle act of the trilogy, and it just kind of meandered. And then once I was taken out, and I was so disappointed because I was doing this a lot by audio, and Robin Miles' audio narration was just killing it. And the first book was so dramatic, so high stakes and suspenseful and fast paced, lots of things happening pretty quickly. And I was just so into that, and I wanted that to keep going and not to have this major change of pace. And I know not everyone experiences this book in that way, but man, it was not what I was hoping for out of this sequel, and kind of sapped my enjoyment from the whole series. And book 3 took a little while for me to finally get reinvested by the end, but man, it was a series that after book 1 I had such high hopes for. So man, when that book 2 just is a huge drop off in enjoyment, that's just such a downer. And yeah, I do want to continue Jemison though, because there's a lot in her writing that was powerful. Just did not like the narrative choices here. At number 2 is The Tyranny of Faith by Richard Swan. So that's book 2 in the Empire of the Wolf series. And I've grouped these kind of to have similar themes in my disappointment, because this is another book 2 coming on the heels of a book 1 that did have me invested and engaged the whole way through, and somehow just completely lost me in the sequel. And maybe some of it was the year break between releases, but then again, there was a similar series that I did that same thing with Ed McDonald's The Red Winter Chronicles series, and kind of occupying the same kind of space in the genre too. And it was easy for me to get back invested in that one. And I do think it was probably the storytelling choices by Swan that I was just not a big fan of here. So book 1, The Justice of Kings, had Conrad von Valt and his kind of assistants out in the outskirts of the Empire, kind of meting out justice, and as a kind of judge, jury, executioner figure. And I found the situations that these characters found themselves very compelling, the side characters very distinctive and interesting, the kind of investigative focus, a little bit of a courtroom focus, really interesting and fresh. But then this book moved the setting to the main capital city of this empire, and that setting change just really changed the whole feel and dynamic of the books, and I think I just wanted more of what book 1 was delivering. Book 2's big change, and then there was this huge kind of side plot involving an investigation in the middle that took up a lot of page time. A lot of other readers I saw think it was side questy, and my interest was really lost in this section. I was feeling like it was just there to set up kind of mysteries and plot reveals that would pay off later. But the book kind of lost me there, and then my kind of analytical brain was on. I wasn't really immersed in the story. I was nitpicking little prose choices and plot holes, or just getting annoyed by all of the characters in a way that I was not in book 1. Man, everything was just collapsing in terms of my interest in this story. And by the end, when some high-stakes things were happening, I was just apathetic and not caring at all. And that is not where I want to be with my books. My biggest disappointment of the year, and this is not even close, my only 1-star read, and that was the White Sand graphic novel by Brandon Sanderson. I've enjoyed pretty much everything that he's put out in the Cosmere that's kind of official Cosmere canon, and I thought that this revised edition that I got, that they put out, an omnibus of the 3 volumes that they put their artists on the job of revising it and adding to it. I got the deluxe edition, and I thought that it would be just okay at the very worst, but I did not expect to despise and hate this story this much, hating every second I spent with it. I just could not stand the characters here, and the plotting just was not set up very well. The world, the conflicts, the characters barely established. There's almost no setup. And so when things start to happen and when the stakes of the plot come into play, I just did not care at all what was happening. I don't read that many graphic novels, but other people that are more experienced with it say that there are a lot of issues with the visual layout of this one, and the art is not terribly consistent, and the action and emoting is done in a really clunky way. And I believe all of that, because this was just not able to engage me at all. By far the weakest Cosmere story I've read, and do not pick this graphic novel up if you have not done so already. Just wait for Sanderson to revise the prose version of this, because he wrote this prose version of this White Sand story before he published anything, one of his earliest stories. And then when the Dynamite publisher of graphic novels came to him asking if he had anything that they could adapt as a graphic novel, he gave them this. It's cool that Dragonsteel's willing to experiment, but they just should have canned this project when it wasn't working, and they've tried to revise it. They're now doing a prose version. It's clear that Sanderson is not happy with this being kind of the final word on the story and these characters. And so this, I would say, just wait a couple years. He has plans to put out the new version in prose, and if it's similar to this, I have a hard time thinking that it's going to be good, but he's probably improved so much as an author these last bunch of years that I think he's probably going to shape it up into something that's decent. And maybe if he does a lot of additions and changes, maybe it could even be something I could connect to, but I already have such negative associations with this based on the graphic novel that I don't think I'm ever going to like this story. But yeah, unfortunately, I just had a terrible, terrible time with this, and just by Dragonsteel's biggest failure for me by far, and it's not even close. Just, man, I should have heeded the warnings and stayed away and waited for the prose version. But I didn't know at the time when they did this kind of Indiegogo campaign that there was going to be a revised prose version, unfortunately. So that was my very big mistake, and I'll try to sell this off, see what I can get back for it, because at least the slipcase is nice on this, even if the actual deluxe edition is kind of drab and gray with this glitter kind of art on it. So yeah, don't even like the way the book looks, although yeah, kind of do like that slipcase. But that was my most disappointing read. Luckily though, just even though it's a chunky 3-volume graphic novel, didn't take too long for me to get through that, so I didn't spend too much time in complete misery. But yeah, an easy worst read of my year. Let me know some of yours. I always love hearing about what doesn't work for people. And if you've read any of these that I put on the list, love to hear your take on them. And very happy if you had a better time with those. So I'll catch you later.